The air within the grand synod of the Ethelgard dominion did not circulate so much as it presided, hanging heavy and stagnant, thick with the scent of ozone, ancient parchment, and the biological musk of a dozen species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 cycles. It was a chamber designed to dwarf its occupants, a sprawling amphitheater of obsidian and bioluminescent crystal located deep within the crust of a wandering rogue planet, shielding its illustrious occupants from the prying eyes of the lesser races and the radiation of unstable stars. Here, the light was always dim, casting long, dramatic shadows that flickered against the vaulted ceiling where holographic projections of the galaxy slowly rotated, a shimmering map of ownership and control. High Counselor Virix, a being of chitin and silk-draped elegance, clicked his mandibles in a rhythm of acute agitation, his compound eyes fracturing the image of the council floor into 1,000 shards of political deadlock. He stood upon the central dais, his clawed hands resting upon the sensory interface that connected him to the vast neural network of the Dominion's surveillance grid, a grid that was currently screaming a silent, terrified warning that no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. The silence of the chamber was a deception. Beneath the quiet veneer, data streams were flooding the minds of the delegates, carrying with them the mathematical certainty of a crisis that defied all established protocols. Virix watched the representatives of the Vosk hegemony, hulking reptiles encased in ceremonial power armor that hummed with the latent energy of neutron decay, arguing silently via localized transmission with the ethereal, floating forms of the Kyrian technocracy. The Vosk wanted to mobilize the fleets, to crush whatever anomaly had triggered the sensors with brute thermal force, while the Kyrians, ever the detached observers, wished to study the phenomenon, to dissect the disaster even as it unfolded. Both ancient empires were missing the point, Virix thought, a ripple of frustration coursing through his thorax. They were debating the methodology of reaction when they should have been paralyzed by the nature of the event itself. A distress call had gone out, not from a diplomatic convoy or a military patrol, but from the dead sector, the region of space known as the Godrot, where the fabric of reality was thin and the stars themselves seemed to suffer from a cosmic sickness. No ship went there. No sane captain plotted a course through the gravitational shears that could tear a dreadnought into subatomic confetti. And yet the signal was clear, piercing the subspace static with a desperation that transcended language, a raw, screaming plea for salvation that had rippled across half the spiral arm. "The signal is a trap," the Vosk High Warlord Crown rumbled finally, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics until it vibrated in the chest of every delegate. "It originates from the accretion disk of the Tantalus anomaly. Nothing survives there. Therefore, whatever is broadcasting is bait. We must purge the sector, collapse the jump gates, quarantine the silence." Crown's logic was brutal and efficient, the product of a culture that had survived by destroying anything it could not immediately categorize. Beside him, the Kyrian representative, a collection of geometric lights hovering in a containment field, pulsed a soft, dissenting blue. "Inefficient," the Kyrian synthesized voice echoed, devoid of breath or emotion. "The signal contains complex algorithmic data." It is a biological cry for help, yes, but encoded within it are telemetry readings of a vessel undergoing spaghettification. It is the Ulth, the mercantile caste. They have drifted off course. To destroy them is to destroy data. We must observe their dissolution. It will provide invaluable insight into the event horizon's tidal forces. Virix suppressed a shudder. The Ulth were a minor species, harmless traders who moved goods between the great empires, tolerated like insects in a garden. To the Vosk, they were expendable. To the Kyrians, they were test subjects. The cruelty of the elder races was not born of malice, but of a profound, calcified indifference. They had lived too long, seen too many stars die, to care about the fate of a single transport ship caught in a gravity well. But Virix saw something the others were ignoring, a subtle anomaly on the periphery of the holographic map, a faint, rhythmic pulse that did not match the chaotic signature of the storm or the desperate erraticism of the dying Ulth ship. It was a new signal, approaching, fast. "You argue over the grave of the Ulth," Virix announced, his voice chittering with a sharpness that cut through the debate, "while you ignore the intruder. Look to the edge of the Tantalus sector. We are not the only ones listening." The holographic map shifted at his command, zooming in on the swirling vortex of violet and black that marked the Godrot. There, amidst the gravitational turbulence, a cluster of small, distinct lights had appeared. They were not using the elegant, fluid slipspace drives of the Ethelgard, nor the brute force wormhole borers of the Vosk. Their propulsion signature was dirty, a crude mixture of fusion torch and distorted localized spacetime, leaving a trail of radiation and ion wash that offended the refined sensors of the Council. "What is that?" Crown demanded, his tail lashing behind him. "Pirates, scavengers. Too organized," the Kyrian noted, its lights spinning faster. 12 vessels, configuration matches the species designated humanity. Sol system origin, newcomers, primitives. Laughter, dry and rattling, rippled through the chamber. Humanity, the species that had only barely mastered faster-than-light travel a century ago. The species that built ships out of dense alloys and relied on kinetic weaponry because they hadn't yet perfected plasma containment. They were considered the children of the galaxy, loud, messy, and irrelevant. They are responding to the distress call, Vrix realized, the absurdity of the thought making his antennae twitch. They intend to enter the anomaly. The Vosk warlord let out a bark of amusement. Then they will die alongside the Ulth. The Tantalus gravity well requires shields of harmonic resonance to survive. The humans use polarized magnetic plating. They will be crushed instantly. Let us watch their folly. It will serve as a lesson to other upstarts. The Council settled in, the mood shifting from tension to a grotesque form of entertainment. They were ancient gods watching mortals walk into a fire, expecting the satisfaction of inevitable ash. But as the sensor feeds clarified, projecting the visual telemetry onto the massive central dome, Vrix felt the cold gripping his insides intensify. The human ships were not turning back. They were accelerating. The scene displayed on the obsidian ceiling was apocalyptic. The Tantalus anomaly was a tear in the universe, a swirling maw of dimensional instability where physics broke down. The Ulth transport, a bulbous, organic-looking vessel, was trapped in the outer bands of the accretion disk, its hull buckling under the immense tidal stresses. Atmosphere was venting in crystallized plumes, sparking as it hit the shear zone. And diving straight into that hell was the human task force. They were ugly ships, blocky and utilitarian, painted in stark grays and whites, scarred by micrometeoroids and the harshness of their home system. They lacked the grace of the Ethelgard solar sailors or the intimidation of the Vosk dreadnoughts. They looked like flying bricks, bolted together with stubbornness and fusion drives. "Magnify on the lead vessel," Vrix commanded. The image blurred and sharpened, revealing the flagship. Stenciled on its side in archaic script were the words UNS Indomitable. It was shuddering violently as it hit the first wave of gravitational turbulence. Pieces of external plating were ripping off, tumbling away into the void. "Their structural integrity is failing," the Kyrian drone observed. "They are at 80% hull stress. They should be retreating. Why are they not retreating?" It was a question that hung in the air, unanswered by the logic of the elder races. By all metrics of survival, the humans should have turned their engines to maximum reverse and fled. Instead, the Indomitable and her escorts fired their maneuvering thrusters, angling their bows toward the singularity, using the gravity well to sling themselves faster toward the doomed Ulth ship. "This is madness," a delegate from the aquatic Hydron Concordat bubbled from their water-filled tank. "They are trading their lives for a minor species. There is no strategic value. The Ulth possess no technology the humans do not already have. There is no profit. It is illogical." And yet the drama unfolded with a terrifying clarity. The Council listened as the intercepted comms from the human fleet began to play over the chamber's speakers. They expected screaming, panic, the chaotic babble of creatures facing their end. Instead, they heard voices that were chillingly calm. "Control, this is Vanguard leader. Gravity shear at point 4. Hull vibration is within tolerance. We are proceeding to intercept." "Copy, Vanguard. Target is drifting port side. Harpoons are primed. Watch your heat sinks, Indomitable, you're running hot." "Roger that. Venting coolant. We have visual on the Ulth vessel. It looks bad. Life support is failing. We have a 5-minute window before they hit the event horizon." "Understood, all ships locking S-foils. Prepare for hard burn on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The transmission was devoid of fear. It was professional, almost bored, the chatter of engineers solving a problem rather than martyrs facing a black hole. The Vosk warlord leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "They are venting coolant?" He rumbled. "In a gravity well, that will destabilize their core temp. They are using the coolant expansion to create a temporary thrust cushion," the Kyrian analyzed, its lights flashing rapidly. "Crude, dangerous, brilliant. They are riding the explosion of their own lifeblood to gain velocity." On the screen, the human ships seemed to ignite, wreathed in clouds of superheated steam and plasma as they burned their engines beyond safety limits. They closed the distance to the Ulth ship in seconds, a maneuver that should have liquefied the crew inside their acceleration couches. The sheer G-forces involved were lethal to most sentient life, yet the humans persisted. Vrix watched, mesmerized, as the blocky human ship surrounded the dying Ulth transport. They did not tow it with tractor beams, they didn't have the power. Instead, they did something archaic and visceral. They fired physical cables, massive magnetic grappling lines that slammed into the Ulth hull with concussive force. Physical tethers, the Hydran delegate gasped. In a shear zone, the tension will snap their spines. The human ship shuddered as the lines went taut. The massive weight of the Ulth transport, dragged by the singularity, yanked the human fleet backward. The metal of the Indomitable groaned, a sound picked up by the laser microphones and broadcast into the council chamber like the roar of a dying beast. Sparks flew from the human hulls as their frames twisted. They were literally holding onto the victim with their hands, refusing to let go, their engines screaming white-hot against the pull of the void. "They are going to die," Vrix whispered, and for the first time in centuries he felt a pang of something other than superiority. He felt respect. They are going to die and they know it, and they are doing it anyway. But the humans did not die, not yet. As the Indomitable was dragged closer to the event horizon, a new energy signature spiked from within the human flagship. It was not a weapon, it was not a shield, it was a frequency low and resonant that seemed to vibrate the very fabric of the council chamber light years away. "What is that?" Crown demanded. "Readings?" "Unknown," the Kyrian admitted, sounding disturbed. It is a resonance cascade. They are broadcasting a frequency that hardens local spacetime. They are creating a static field around themselves, artificial stasis. No, they are anchoring themselves to the quantum foam. The Indomitable activated its anchor drive, a piece of technology the elder races had never seen. Space around the human fleet turned rigid, gray, and heavy. The swirling chaos of the Tantalus anomaly crashed against this bubble of stability like waves against a cliff. The human ship stopped moving. They had become immovable objects in a universe of unstoppable forces. The cables held. The Ulth ship jerked to a halt mere kilometers from destruction. Then slowly, painfully, the human engines flared again, pushing off against the solidified space they had created, inching the convoy back away from the abyss. Silence descended upon the Grand Synod. The arrogant laughter was gone. The Vosk warlords stood motionless. The Carian lights had dimmed to a contemplative purple. They were watching the impossible. A primitive race using dirty technology was wrestling a black hole and winning. It took 3 hours of agonizing struggle, played out in real time, for the human fleet to drag the Ulth transport to the safe zone. When they finally released the cables, the Indomitable looked like a wreck. Its hull was scorched, its armor plates buckled, its antennas sheared off, but it was alive. The channel opened again. A face appeared on the main holographic projector, replacing the star map. It was a human female, her face smeared with grease and blood, a bandage wrapped around her forehead. She wore a gray uniform with a simple patch, United Earth Navy. She looked exhausted, her eyes possessing a hardness that made even the Vosk uncomfortable. She looked into the camera, not knowing she was addressing the High Council of the galaxy, but broadcasting on an open frequency to the sector. "This is Admiral Sarah Vance of the UNS Indomitable," she said, her voice raspy but steady. "To the vessel identified as Ulth Transport Crying Star, we have you. Your orbit is stabilized. Our medical teams are boarding now. You are safe." She paused, wiping blood from her lip. "To any other vessels monitoring this frequency, the Tantalus sector is closed. We are marking it as a hazard. Do not approach until we have stabilized the rift. Terra command out." The transmission cut. The council sat in the heavy silence of the aftermath. They had just witnessed a species risk total annihilation to save a trading barge of no political value. They had seen technology that manipulated the fundamental constants of mass and gravity, wielded by creatures who supposedly barely understood warp theory. "We muse." "T summon them," Crown said finally, his voice lacking its usual bluster. "We must understand. How did they do that? Why did they do that?" Vrix tapped his claws on the console. "We will not summon them, Warlord. We will invite them, and we will pray they accept, for if they can anchor themselves against a black hole, what could they do to a fleet?" The invitation was sent with the highest diplomatic priority, encrypted with the royal ciphers of the Ethelgard. It was a summons to the Great Conclave, the physical meeting ground of the elder races located on the ring world of Ophion. It was a place of unparalleled beauty, a constructed paradise orbiting a binary star, where the architecture was grown from crystal and light. The humans accepted, but their arrival was not the humble procession the council expected. When the human delegation arrived at Ophion, they did not come in a sleek diplomatic yacht. They came in the Indomitable. They had patched the hull, but the scars remained, burn marks from the gravity, well-twisted metal that had been hammered back into place. It docked at the gleaming spire of the conclave like a wounded war beast resting among swans. The contrast was stark, almost offensive to the aesthetic of the elder races. And when Admiral Vance walked down the ramp, flanked by two soldiers in powered exoskeletons, the silence of the reception hall was deafening. Virik stood at the head of the receiving line, flanked by the towering crown and the floating Kyrian intellect. He studied the humans. They were small, soft-skinned, lacking natural armor or weapons. They looked fragile. Yet as Vance approached, Virik sensed the bioelectric field of a predator. Not a mindless hunter, but a calculating, enduring survivor. "Admiral Vance," Virik said, the universal translator smoothing his chittering speech into flat human vowels. "We welcome you to Ophion. Your actions in the Tantalus sector were noted." Vance nodded, her expression unreadable. "Counselor, we appreciate the invitation. My government thought it best we clarify our presence in the sector before any misunderstandings arose." "Misunderstandings?" Crown scoffed, stepping forward. The giant reptile towered over the human woman, his shadow engulfing her. "You violated a quarantine zone. You used unknown technology that disrupts subspace. You risked your fleet for nothing, the Ulth. They are nothing." Vance did not flinch. She did not look up at the giant. She looked him straight in the eye, her posture relaxed but ready. "The Ulth had a crew of 4,000, she said quietly. 4,000 souls, that is not nothing where I come from." "It is a statistical error," the Kyrian interrupted. "The energy expenditure required to save them exceeded their economic value by a factor of 10,000. Your logic is flawed. Why did you do it?" The question hung in the air, the central mystery that baffled the alien minds. Vance looked around the hall at the grandeur, the opulence, the thousands of years of accumulated wealth and power. She seemed unimpressed. "We did it," Vance said, her voice carrying to the back of the hall, "because no one else would." There was a murmur among the delegates. It was a simple answer, but it carried a weight of accusation. Vance continued, "We monitored your networks. We saw your fleets sitting on the edge of the sector. We saw you calculating the odds. You did the math, and you decided they weren't worth it. We don't do that math." "You are irrational," Crown growled. "Altruism is a weakness. It drains resources. It kills the strong to save the weak." "Altruism is survival," Vance corrected him, her tone hardening. "You call us primitives. You look at our ships and see brute force. But you don't know our history. We didn't evolve in a garden like this." She gestured to the paradise of Ophion. "We evolved on a death world. Ice ages, volcanoes, predators faster and stronger than us. We survived because we packed together. We survived because when one of us fell, the others stopped to pick them up. If we left the weak behind, the pack got smaller. If the pack got smaller, we all died. That is the logic of humanity, High Warlord. We don't leave people behind, not Ulth, not you, not anyone." The chamber was silent. The concept was alien to the Vosk, who culled their weak. It was alien to the Kyrians, who viewed individuals as data points. But to Virix, the diplomat, it struck a chord of ancient fear. A species that bonded with anyone, a species that would fight for a stranger as hard as they fought for kin, that was not weakness. That was a terrifying kind of strength. It meant their alliances would be unbreakable. It meant their armies would never rout, because they were fighting for the soldier next to them. "And the technology," the Kyrian pressed, desperate to shift the topic to something quantifiable. "The anchor drive. How do you possess such manipulation of physics? You are a young race." Vance smiled, thin, dangerous smile. "We live in a bad neighborhood, Counselor. The Sol system isn't stable like yours. We have solar flares, magnetic storms, gravity shears. We had to learn to nail our ships to reality just to get out of our own backyard. You built ships to glide on smooth seas. We built ships to sail in hurricanes. That device wasn't a weapon. It's a storm anchor. We've had it for 50 years. The revelation sent a shockwave through the gathered experts. The humans had developed top-tier gravitational tech not for war, but merely to survive their own hostile home system. It implied a resilience that the elder races had lost millennia ago. They had become soft in their superiority. "We have questions for you as well," Vance said, shifting the dynamic of the conversation. She tapped a device on her wrist, and a hologram projected into the space between them. It was a recording of the distress call from the Tantalus anomaly, but it was filtered, the background noise stripped away. When we were in the well holding the Ulth ship, we heard something else. Beneath the distress call, there was a second signal, a carrier wave. The hologram played a deep, rhythmic thrumming sound. It sounded like a heartbeat, slow and immense. The reaction of the High Council was immediate and visceral. Vrix's antennae flattened against his skull. Crown took a step back, his hand going to his weapon. The Kyrian lights turned a frantic, warning red. "Turn it off," Vrix hissed, his composure shattering. "Where did you get that recording?" "From the center of the anomaly," Vance said, not deactivating the hologram. "It's a beacon, and it's not Ulth, it's ancient, and it's pointing, here." "The Silent Ones," Crown whispered, the fear in his voice genuine. "The myths were true." The atmosphere in the hall shifted from diplomatic tension to existential dread. The elder races looked at each other, the veil of their arrogance torn away. Vrix realized with a sinking heart that the humans had stumbled onto a secret the galaxy had tried to bury for an eon. "We thought it was a natural phenomenon," Vrix confessed, his voice trembling. "The Tantalus anomaly, we thought it was a collapsed star, but the archives, the forbidden archives speak of a prison." "A prison?" Vance asked, her eyes narrowing. "For the enemy," the Kyrian intoned. "The anti-life, a force that consumes consciousness. The precursors locked it away eons ago. They used gravity as the bars, the distress call, the Ulth. It was not an accident. The anomaly lured them in. It needed biomass to fuel the lock mechanism or to break it." Vance looked at the recording, then back at the council. "If it was a prison," she said slowly, "then we might have made a mistake when we anchored the space. We stopped the crushing force. We stopped the mechanism." As if on cue, the lights of the ring world flickered. A siren began to wail, a sound that had not been heard on Ophion in 5,000 years. The holographic map of the galaxy overhead turned a violent blood red. The Tantalus anomaly was expanding. "You broke the seal," Crown roared, leveling his weapon at Vance. "You foolish primitives, you saved 4,000 insects and doomed the galaxy." Vance's guards stepped forward, their exoskeletons humming, but Vance held up a hand. "Stand down," she ordered. She looked at Crown, her face pale but resolved. "If we broke it, we fix it. What is coming out?" "Everything," Vrix whispered. "The Void Legions, they do not use ships. They infest space itself. They will sweep over us like a plague." The sensors screamed. The Tantalus sector was gone. In its place was a widening hole in reality, and pouring out of it were shapes that defied geometry, fractal, dark, jagged shards of nothingness that devoured light. They moved with terrifying speed, spreading like ink in water. "The fleets must retreat," the Vosk warlord declared, panic overriding his honor. "We must fall back to the core worlds, fortify the inner sanctums, leave the rim territories to slow them down." "Abandon the outer systems?" Vance asked, incredulous. "There are billions of sentient beings in those sectors, colonies, developing worlds." "They are lost," Crown shouted. "This is extinction human, we save what we can." Vance looked at the terrified faces of the galactic rulers. The ancient, powerful, wise rulers who were ready to sacrifice half the galaxy to save their own palaces. She shook her head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "No," she said, "that's not how this works." She tapped her comms. "Vance to Indomitable, contact Earth Command, authorization code 001, initiate protocol, Phalanx." "What are you doing?" Vrix asked, watching as the human admiral turned her back on the council and began walking toward her ship. "We're calling the rest of the pack," Vance said over her shoulder. "You run if you want, we're digging in." The elder races watched in stunned silence as the Indomitable lift. D-off burning hard for the upper atmosphere. They watched as the human fleet, those 12 battered ships, did not retreat to Earth, but warped back toward the expanding darkness. And then they watched the screens as the response came. It was not 12 ships. Space around the Tantalus sector began to tear open. Not with the elegant grace of the Ethelgard, but with the violent, tearing arrival of human warp drives. Hundreds of them. Thousands. From every human colony, mining station, and military outpost, the United Earth Navy arrived. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, carriers launching swarms of drone fighters, industrial haulers retrofitted with railguns. They formed a wall of steel and fire between the Void Legions and the inhabited worlds. "They are forming a line," the Kyrian observed, its voice processing the data with disbelief. "They cannot win, the enemy is infinite, the humans are finite." "They are not trying to win," Vrix realized, watching the tactical display. The human ships were detonating nuclear mines, firing mass drivers, ramming the fractal entities. They were dying by the thousands. They are buying time for us. The battle was a slaughter. The Void Legions were eldritch horrors, phasing through shields and consuming crews. But the humans fought with a savagery that unsettled even the Vosk. When a human ship was disabled, it didn't surrender. It overloaded its reactor. When a line faltered, another wave of ships jumped in to plug the gap. It was the philosophy of the pack, writ large on a stellar scale. We survive because we bleed for each other. Inside the council chamber, the shame began to take root. It started with Vrix. He looked at his claws, the hands of a species that prided itself on culture and art, and felt a deep, burning self-loathing. He looked at Crown, who was watching the battle with a mixture of hunger and cowardice. "The primitives are dying for our subjects," Vrix said softly. "The Ulth, the minor races, the humans are dying for them." "They are fools," Crown grunted, though his voice lacked conviction. "No," Vrix said, his voice rising. "We are the fools. We have ruled for 10,000 years, and we have forgotten what it means to lead. To lead is to protect." Vrix walked to the communications console. He keyed in the planetary defense codes. "This is High Counselor Vrix. All Ethelgard fleets mobilize, coordinates, Tantalus sector, assist the humans." "You violate the consensus," the Kyrian protested. "Consensus be damned," Vrix shouted, his mandibles clicking in a war cry his people hadn't used in millennia. "The Ethelgard will not stand by while the children of Terra fight our monsters." The Vosk warlord looked at Vrix, then at the screen where a human dreadnought was currently ramming a Void mothership, splitting it in two before exploding. Crown let out a low, rumbling laugh. "The bug has a spine," he muttered. He slammed his fist onto his own console. "Vosk High Command, this is Warlord Crown. The hunt is on. Follow the human wake. If they die with honor, and I will not have a hairless ape die with more honor than a Vosk." The galaxy shifted that day. The Kyrians, seeing the logic of collective defense, joined the fray, their science ships deploying probability weapons that disrupted the Void Legion's phasing. The three great empires, for the first time in history, fought not against each other, but side by side, rallied by the sacrifice of the youngest race. The battle lasted for 3 weeks. It was a grinder of metal and meat. The Tantalus sector became a graveyard of ships, but the line held. The phalanx of humanity, bolstered by the energy shields of the Ethelgard and the firepower of the Vosk, pushed the Void Legions back. And at the climax of the battle, it was the Indomitable, repaired and returned to the front, that delivered the final blow. Admiral Vance, her ship leaking atmosphere, her crew decimated, led a strike team into the heart of the rift. They carried a payload developed by the Kyrians and the humans working in tandem. A reality bomb. A device that would invert the anchor drive's effect and seal the tier permanently. "Vance to Allied fleet," her voice crackled over the myriad channels of 1,000 species. "We are starting the run, keep them off us." "We are with you, Admiral," Vrix replied from the bridge of his solar dreadnought. "The Ethelgard shield bearers are in position." "Vosk Warpack is flanking," Crown roared. "Clear a path for the little one." The indomitable dove, the darkness swallowed it. For 10 agonizing minutes there was only static. Then a flash of light brighter than a supernova illuminated the sector. The rift collapsed, imploding with a sound that was felt in the bones of every being in the system. The Void Legions vanished, severed from their source. The stars returned, quiet and cold. But the Indomitable did not return. The memorial service was held on Ophion. It was the largest Gath, airing of sentient life in recorded history. Representatives from every species, no matter how small, stood in silence. In the center of the hall, where the holographic map usually displayed territories, there was now a simple statue. It was crude, made of gray, unpolished steel. It depicted a human soldier, hand outstretched, helping a fallen comrade. Vrix stood at the podium. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were clear. "We called them primitives," he spoke to the galaxy. "We mocked their technology. We questioned their logic. We believed that civilization was measured by the longevity of our buildings or the complexity of our laws. We were wrong." He looked at the human delegation, the survivors, the new commanders, the families of the fallen. "Civilization is not measured by how high you build your towers," Vrix continued. "It is measured by how wide you build your circle of protection. Humanity taught us that the strongest force in the universe is not gravity or nuclear fire. It is the refusal to let another suffer alone. They answered a distress call that we ignored, and in doing so, they saved us all. He paused, looking up at the stars. The distress call shook the stars, Vrix concluded, but the answer changed them forever. The ending was not just peace, it was a new era. The Council of Elders was dissolved. In its place, the Terran Concordat was formed, not ruled by humans but founded on their philosophy. The Vosk learned to use their strength to build. The Kyrians learned to use their science to heal. And the Ethelgard learned that dignity came from service. And out in the dark, in the silence of the drift where the Tantalus Rift once stood, a beacon still floated. It was a buoy placed by the humans. It transmitted a simple message on a loop into the void, a warning and a promise to anything that might be listening in the dark. This is United Earth territory. We are here, we are watching, and we do not run. The galaxy was no longer a collection of lonely empires in the dark. It was a pack, and it was hunting the nightmares together. The silence following Vrix's speech was not empty. It was pregnant with a new kind of gravity. It was the weight of obligation. The delegates began to disperse, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air on Ophion tasted different, sharper, less stagnant. The Vosk warriors did not march out with their usual rhythmic stomp of superiority. They walked with a thoughtful, almost solemn cadence, their eyes scanning the humans they passed not as prey or curiosities, but as peers. Perhaps even as betters in the one metric that suddenly mattered, the capacity for sacrifice. But the story did not end with the closing of the rift. The universe, having been cracked open, had revealed layers that the elder races had been too frightened to explore. The reality bomb that sealed the Tantalus breach had done more than just close a door. It had rung a bell. The energy discharge had sent a tachyon ripple through the subspace network, a signal that traveled instantly to the edge of the known universe and beyond. In the weeks following the memorial, the Terran Concordat began the arduous process of rebuilding. Earth became a hub, not of empire, but of logistics. The sheer industrial output of the human systems, previously mocked as quantity over quality, became the lifeblood of the recovery. Human engineers, with their duct tape and prayer methodology, were deployed to fix delicate Ethelgard crystalline spires and Vosk fusion forges. They brought a chaotic, innovative energy that horrified the purists and delighted the pragmatists. It was during this reconstruction that the second twist occurred. Deep in the Kyrian data vaults, the analysis of the Indomitable's final moments was being processed. The Kyrians, obsessed with data, had recorded every microsecond of the flagship's dive into the anomaly. They wanted to understand the physics of the collapse. What they found, however, was not physics. It was a transmission. High Scholar Xylth, the successor to the Kyrian representative, requested an emergency session with the new Concordat leadership. This meeting was different. It wasn't in the grand amphitheater. It was in a secure tactical bunker on Earth's moon, a location chosen by the humans for its hardened defenses. Vrix was there, as was Crown's successor, a scarred warrior named Growl. And presiding was the new human admiral, a man named Sterling, who had served as Vance's XO on a different ship. "You have found something?" Sterling asked, his voice gravelly. The gravity on the moon was low, but the tension was crushing. "We have deciphered the last second of the Indomitable's telemetry," Xylth stated, projecting a complex waveform into the center of the room. "Before the Admiral detonated the payload, the Rift spoke to her." "Spoke," Growl rumbled. "The Void Legions are mindless hunger, they do not speak." "Not the Legions," Xylth core. "See, Ted, the structure behind them. We believed the Tantalus anomaly was a prison for the Void. We were incorrect. It was not a prison, it was a quarantine zone." "That is the same thing," Vrix noted, confused. "No," Sterling said, leaning forward. "A prison keeps bad things in, a quarantine keeps good things out of an infected area." He looked at the Kyrian. "Who was quarantined? Us? The galaxy?" "Precisely," Xylth said. "The signal we intercepted was a handshake protocol. When the humans used the anchor drive and then the reality bomb, they demonstrated a specific combination of will and tech. The signal identified this. It unlocked a message embedded in the background radiation of the sector." The Kyrian activated the audio. It was not the screech of the void. It was a voice, synthesized but clear, speaking a language that was a root derivative of all the elder tongues, suggesting a common ancestry or a common teacher. Constraint parameter met. Subject species, humanity, trait, self-determination for collective preservation. Ethical threshold passed, the nursery is open. The room fell silent. "Nursery," Vrix whispered. The word felt small, diminishing. The Ethelgard were millions of years old. They were the masters of the stars. To be referred to as occupants of a nursery was humbling. It continues, Zalth said. Warning, the silence was not to protect you from the void. It was to hide you from the hunters until you were ready. By breaking the seal, you have announced your maturity. The hunters will see you now. Prepare. We are returning to evaluate the crop. The recording ended. Growl slammed his fist into the table, denting the reinforced steel. Hunters, crops, we are not cattle, we are the Vosk. We are children, Virix said, the realization washing over him with chilling certainty. We thought we were the elder races, but we were just the toddlers left in the playpen. The Tantalus anomaly was the gate, and we just kicked it open. Sterling stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the gray lunar landscape and the blue marble of Earth hanging in the void. He didn't look afraid. He looked focused. So, Sterling said, there's something bigger out there, something that put us in a crib and told us to stay quiet, and now they're coming back to see if we're worth keeping. He turned back to the aliens. The giant reptile, the floating brain, the elegant insect. They looked terrified. Their worldview, which had just been reshaped by humanity's sacrifice, was now being shattered by cosmic insignificance. They think we're a crop, Sterling said, a grim smile touching his lips. They think they're coming back to harvest. What do we do? Virix asked, looking to the human for guidance. It was a reflex now. When the sky was falling, you looked to the ones who held it up. We do what we always do, Sterling said, channeling the ghost of Admiral Vance. We dig in, we fortify. If they want to evaluate us, fine. We'll show them we're not wheat to be harvested. We're wolves, and this is our territory. He tapped the tactical map. Zylth, I want that signal analyzed. Find the source. Growl, get your fleets refitted with the new anchor tech. We're going to need to hold the line again. Virix, we need your diplomats to unite the outer rim. No more minor species. Everyone gets a gun. Everyone gets a shield. You intend to fight the precursors? Zylth asked, its lights pulsing with logical alarm. The beings who built the galaxy. I intend to negotiate, Sterling said. But in my experience, negotiations go better when you have a loaded weapon on the table. The story of the distress call was over. The story of the awakening had begun. The galaxy had been shaken by humanity's first contact, but now it was steeling itself for the second. The humans had taught the aliens how to die for a cause. Now they would teach them how to live for a war. The camera pulled back through the roof of the lunar base, past the orbiting shipyards where human and alien engineers floated side by side, welding armor plates onto a hybrid dreadnought. It pulled back past the orbit of Mars, past the debris of the Tantalus sector, and out into the intergalactic void. There in the infinite black, something was moving, vast shapes blotting out the light of distant galaxies. They were ancient, cold, and hungry. They had heard the distress call. They had seen the flash of the reality bomb. They were coming to see what kind of creature was foolish enough to break the silence. But back in the Milky Way, the lights were not going out. They were getting brighter. 1,000 stars were flaring with the exhaust of engines. The pack was gathering, and for the first time in the history of the universe, the darkness would find that the light bit back. The ethos of the galaxy had shifted from survival of the fittest to survival of the united. The fear that had once paralyzed the High Council was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve, a V. Human resolve. Virix, returning to his quarters on the new Concordat capital ship, looked at a small datapad. It contained the file on human history he had been reading. He stopped at a quote from an ancient Earth conflict, a simple phrase that seemed to encapsulate the madness and the majesty of his new allies. Nuts. He didn't fully understand the context, but he understood the sentiment. Defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. He clicked his mandibles in a soft approximation of a chuckle. Nuts, he repeated to the empty room. He looked out the viewport at the stars. The hunters were coming. Let them come,